I am so pleased to welcome back to the show my friend and best-selling author and guy with deep connections here in Colorado, the one and only Joel C. Rosenberg. His latest book, The Beirut Protocol, that I'm holding in my hands right here. Joel, I have finished the book already. I read it. Oh, and you got a copy too.
And you're having me on anyway. Well, thank you, Ross. I appreciate it very much.
It's a wonderful read as always, and it raises so many questions, just like all of your stuff does. You're just such an expert on that part of the world because you know all the players, and you live in Jerusalem and you understand the dynamics of Middle East politics, which helps you make these novels so realistic. One of the central themes, besides the whole Hezbollah hostage thing, is peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I'm really curious how you're thinking about that in terms of a true peace treaty and what you think may be going on there.
Sure. Well, great to be with you, Ross. And I'm sorry we're not in studio in Colorado. The airports have been closed here. They're just opening now, but because of COVID, I couldn't get to the States for a book tour. But thank you for having me on. Look, the Beirut Protocol you're right, it's a political thriller about a U.S. president trying to broker peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and the fear, a real fear, and in this case, in the Beirut Protocol, an active fear, that the Iranians and their terrorist allies and their proxies will try to blow up this peace process. Now, at the moment, there is no Saudi-Israeli peace process, at least not out in the open.
Right.
When I was writing, the Beirut Protocol follows the Jerusalem assassin, which you and I talked about last year, which was the beginnings of the peace process between the Saudis and the Israelis. And even then, when we talked about it, it was like, well, that seems a little far-fetched at the moment. Now, in between last year's book, The Jerusalem Assassin and the Beirut Protocol, 4 Arab-Israeli peace treaties have, in fact, been negotiated, signed, sealed, and delivered between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and the Kingdom of Morocco. So that's real drama in real life. 4 Arab-Israeli peace treaties. We haven't had any since in 25 years. Now we have 4 new ones, bringing us to a total of 6, the others being Egypt and Jordan. And so the question is, wow, what once seemed fiction, the Saudis and the Israelis, come on. Now suddenly it's like, well, people are like, maybe this could happen. The other piece of interesting news since the novel was written and edited and finished but not yet released in the Beirut Protocol is that last December, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a briefly secret trip, meaning it didn't take long before the news leaked, to Saudi Arabia, where he met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, widely known as MBS, and then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And that meeting is so interesting because it is a meeting almost ripped out of the book, the Beirut Protocol, and yet it's really happening. So at the moment, it's still fiction, but the forces that I described fictionally in the Jerusalem Assassin and the Beirut Protocol that could bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together with U.S. help, those are the dynamics that are at play right now, and that is the threat from Iran.
My special guest, Joel Rosenberg, his latest in the Marcus Ryker series is the Beirut Protocol. I finished the book already, couldn't put it down. Is this, as you ended this book, it was the first Marcus Ryker book where I thought maybe Joel is going to move to another character. Like, is this the last Marcus Ryker? And I don't know if this is the kind of question where, like, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you, like, if you gave me the answer.
No. In this case, well, one of the reasons you think that is because often I have a cliffhanger ending in the Marcus Ryker. Once I literally had people jumping out of a plane, and then that was the end of the book. and you had to wait a year to find out, do they land? Do they die? Do they live? What freaking happens in this book? You can't just leave me in midair. Maybe on an episodic weekly television show or Netflix, but a year between novels. I mean, come on, Rosenberg. But anyway, I did that. In this case, there was an actual ending, and that would add to your suspicions. Plus, I have traditionally in my other series done trilogies. But I can tell you, I am hard at work on the next Marcus Ryker novel. I like this guy. He intrigues me, and I think I'm going to go for a while with Marcus Ryker.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. All right, let me just switch gears for a moment. Did you have a Seder?
I did, absolutely. Come on. We live in Jerusalem.
Yeah. Tell us a little about your Seder. Who was at your Seder?
Yeah, well, some of our dear friends who actually live, they're not literally settlers, I guess, but they do live in a Israeli city in Judea and Samaria called Ma'ale Adumim. They came over. We're still in a point where things are getting better with COVID, but the government is encouraging people not to have big, huge Seder gatherings. So it was just one family this year. But it was so sweet, the whole story of the Seder, the Passover Seder. The whole story is severalfold. One, God rescuing the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, from slavery and bringing us to freedom, bringing us back to the land of Israel, but also a series of plagues befalling the enemies of Israel, and God protecting the people of Israel from this plague. Now, we have had a plague, a literal, almost biblical plague this year, and it's been painful. Last year, you couldn't meet with anybody for Seder. We met as a family. We just sat as a family. We went through the ceremony, and then we watched The Prince of Egypt because we didn't have anybody over. So that was a new one, and it was kind of eerie, kind of weird to have a Passover Seder canceled by a plague. But anyway, things are getting a little bit better this year. And look, Israel is now on track to, I think, be in the clear in the next month or two. Yeah. Our infection rates are dropping. Our hospitalization rates are dropping. Our death rate is dropping. And that's in a big part because we now have almost 90% of our population has had at least one of the two vaccination shots, and more than 50%, myself and my family included, have had both shots. So it's working. There don't seem to be any serious, any real side effects at all. And the country's starting to reopen and think, wow, maybe we're through the worst of it. But I know the United States is still battling some serious numbers, and it's having a slow time getting the rollout of the vaccine. But here in Israel, it's gone very well.
Joel Rosenberg is joining us from Jerusalem. Okay, Joel, I'm going to make you our roving political correspondent now. Joel Rosenberg, our foreign affairs correspondent, joins us from Jerusalem, where he's reporting for 630 KHOW on how, for the 117th time in a row, Israeli elections have not produced a clear winner in the prime minister's race.
Walter Cronkite, this is how it is. Well, that may predate your audience so far that they're like, Walter Cronkite. I mean, come on. Well, what are you talking about? Okay, listen. And I am increasingly a journalist. We have this new website, All Israel News, and the sister site, All Arab News, to track these stories because they're so interesting and the other coverage is so bad. So here's the short version for 630 KHOW in Denver and the Front Range. Listen, Israel is the only real and robust democracy in the entire Middle East, and we must be, because we love elections so much. We've had 4 in 2 years. The reason we keep having elections is because our prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the longest serving prime minister in the history of the modern state of Israel, he cannot win enough seats to put together a stable governing coalition. And so he tries it again, and he tries it again, and he finds some loophole to try it again. And 4 times in a row, so far, he hasn't done it. Now, it could happen, but right now, Netanyahu and his allies are at 59 seats, okay, out of 120 in the parliament. Now, yeah, they could persuade maybe two people. They could try to, poach two people out of other parties to quit their parties and come with Netanyahu. And they're already offering, like, you can be the foreign minister, you can be the defense minister, whatever. Just come to our side and help us build a government. Here's Netanyahu's main problem, Ross. Netanyahu has tremendous strengths. I mean, he negotiated these 4 Arab-Israeli peace deals. He persuaded Trump to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, declare Jerusalem the capital of Israel, and so on and so on. I could give you a long list of things that Netanyahu's done so well. But after being in office so long and on the political scene for more than a quarter of a century, he has basically embittered so many political rivals that even people who agree with him on the issues mostly won't. They say, we will never serve in a government with him ever again. These are people who used to be his chief of staff. These were people who used to be the number 2 in his party. These are people who were his closest political allies. And he's burned so many of them that his pathway to building a coalition has narrowed. I'm not saying he can't pull it off. Benjamin Netanyahu is a shrewd political cat, Ross. I mean, this guy is, that's why he's been prime minister for so long. But we may really be seeing the beginnings of a post-Netanyahu era. I laid this out in a Newsweek column last week because Netanyahu may have ticked off one too many political rivals to the point where they don't want to play ball with him anymore.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, let's go back to your book. We've got just maybe 90 seconds or 2 minutes left. And again, if you're just joining us, Joel Rosenberg, his latest book is The Beirut Protocol. I finished it, couldn't put it down. Joel has sold about 5 million books. That's pretty incredible. Part of what happens in this book, and of course, you and I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but there's some Americans who are doing some work and they get kidnapped by a member of Hezbollah who goes rogue, and a whole story around that. But one of the interesting parts of the story, because it ties into a potential reality, is what it would look like if some kind of miscalculation causes a war that starts along the Israeli-Lebanon border, especially with the number of missiles that we believe that Hezbollah has, including missiles of increasing sophistication that they're getting from Iran. Tell us how you're thinking about this.
That's right. In brief, Hezbollah is a terror organization founded, funded, armed, trained, and directed by the regime in Tehran, but the Iranian regime. They're based in Lebanon. They have basically taken over. Hezbollah has basically taken over Lebanon. Lebanon is not its own independent country anymore. It's essentially a province of Iran, controlled, strangled, enslaved by a terrorist organization. That terrorist organization has bought and pre-positioned more than 150,000 missiles now. They're all aimed at us here in Israel. And the last war between Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Israel was 15 years ago, 2006. In that 34-day period, Hezbollah fired 4,000 missiles at Israel. In this next war, and it could happen this year, God forbid, but it's brewing in this way, and that's what I write about in the Beirut Protocol. But there could be 4,000 missiles a day landing on Israel if Hezbollah and Iran decide to go at it. And this is what we're worried about. This is the most likely scenario for a war in the Middle East in 2021. So I hope the Beirut Protocol is just fiction, but things are really cooking over here, and I know American media is not covering it, but that's what we're trying to do on All Israel News' site.
Wow. All right, give those 2 websites again.
Sure. Well, my own site is joelrosenberg.com. You can learn all about it, or allisrael.com, and that will take you both to the All Israel News site and our All Arab site, allisrael.com. And you can sign up for our free email newsletter. We'll send you every few days the latest headlines right to your phone.
Joel Rosenberg's new book is The Beirut Protocol. Hey, buddy, I wish you were here in studio with us, but next time,
Thank you.
Instead of next year in Jerusalem, next year, right?
Amen. Sounds good.
Hey, thanks so much for being here, and thanks for the great entertaining writing as always, Joel. We'll talk with you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ross.
All right, thanks. All right, that was a lot of fun. And folks, yeah, go read the book. I suggest actually you just get the whole Marcus Ryker series and read them in order if you haven't. They're really, really good.